I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren. And today, guys, we have a very special episode for you guys. We're going to be joined by DallasBasketball.com's own Grant Afseth. He also does a variety of other work at SB Nation. Very analytically driven guy. And, he is just great in this interview. We get into an assortment of different things in regards to the Mavericks and the implications of what they could do, potentially surrounding their pick, what they could potentially do this offseason, the Kyrie Irving situation. We get into what kind of went wrong with the Christian Wood situation. We talk a lot about the defensive woes with the Mavericks, and we just talk a lot of different reasons as to why things happen schematically. Grant is one of the just more uber talented basketball minds, I think, that Jaren and I, have had the privilege to really converse with. And he just gave some great insight into, why the Mavericks, should have or maybe shouldn't have employed certain strategies. And there were just a lot of comparative things that we talked about. It was really a great podcast, one of our best, and I think that you guys will really enjoy it. He just gives some great insight into what this team might be doing, and what their direction should be, as well as his personal opinions as well. So there is just an assortment of different things to take away from this podcast. Very loaded episode. We went longer than we intended to, so we do apologize to Grant regarding the time, but we'd love to have him back on again. Really fun interview, nonetheless. I'll stop boring you guys with the intro and we'll just go ahead and get straight into it. But nonetheless, first, before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. Welcome back, guys. We are joined here by Grant Afseth of DallasBasketball.com. Our first interview here on the podcast. I know, Grant, that you mentioned that you were open to going on to some podcasts on Twitter. Is this the first Mavs podcast that you've been on?
I've been on a couple of them, but not a ton of them. This is probably I think maybe my third, something like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we at least get the title of having the third podcast that Grant is on, so we'll hold that as our only sort of claim to fame so far. But nonetheless, we'll go ahead and just get straight into it, man. So you've obviously been really up and coming. As far as, from a reporting and journalist aspect goes, really since this season has ensued, you've really took off, but, you obviously been covering the Mavs for a couple years now and the Pacers beforehand. So what exactly inspired you to cover the sport of basketball and just get into this journalist and reporting stuff?
Yeah, I think at first I was always interested in kind of analyzing basketball, and then the format of choice that I kind of gravitated towards was just kind of throwing my thoughts into article format. And I actually did that when I was in middle school, and yeah, I didn't really like the two markets that I followed the most was Indiana sports because I lived there until I was third grade. And then Dallas sports. And I just felt like there wasn't really anybody doing that much for Indiana. So I figured I would, and they were a better team at that point for when I was specifically doing it. So I figured I would, try that out, focus on them at first. And then that actually, it paid off because I ended up, when I was at Arizona State, I think in December of my freshman year, I actually DM'd a newspaper on Twitter that was from the city I used to live in Kokomo, Indiana, and they were like, "Yeah, sure, we would love to have you on a column." So then I kind of did that through college remotely, cover some road games when they went to Phoenix and LA, and that was actually the first sporting event I ever did in person. Was in LA at Staples Center.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of like how I started, and then gravitated eventually towards Dallas because I lived most of my life in Dallas,
Okay.
and then the opportunity opened up later down the road for sure.
Yeah, we're definitely we're trying to sort of etch our way in that direction. So you definitely served as an inspiration for us from that standpoint.
I
You want to
appreciate
go
that.
for the next question, Jay?
Yeah, so I don't know, just from like I guess a fan point of view, like it kind of seems like you've joined sort of like the smaller mass media markets where like you're up and coming, of course, and it seems like I guess like uh, I guess like podcasts like us or fan accounts like us or whatever sort of gravitate towards what you say and what your reporting is. I guess just sort of like I know that you kind of touched up on this a second ago, but like what sparked your style of that? Like I don't know. I feel like at Dallas media, like there's more legacy based media in the sense of like Brad Townsend and everything like that. Uh, you know, just being 100% honest, like it kind of seems like you know I don't know how else to say it, but like you're almost like the up and coming young guy. Like a lot of people look up to you and really kind of inspired are inspired by what you're writing. So I guess just like what kind of inspired or what sparked your passion for that kind of style and what like invigorated your passion for the game in the first place?
Yeah, I think I always or basketball was always my preferred sport. So that kind of drew me to that. And then just my style. I think I always just like to be more kind of analytically driven, whether it's like analyzing with like statistics, numbers,
Yeah.
like data, or I really like to watch a lot of like game film.
Okay.
So like like I actually learn from some people like as mentors, like you could say, who coach like college basketball, who work with NBA players. So like I've helped some NBA players in the past as well with like scouting reports, how to guard certain matchups, how to handle certain closeout assignments, improving like what to focus on in their off-season workouts, examples of things that could be improved. So like applying that into like actual like analytical writing has always been interesting to me, especially like come playoff time, like
Yeah.
seeing like the chess match with the like last year's playoffs was very fascinating. Like I worked really hard to every game, like kind of do a deep dive into like what happened, what could come next, all that kind of stuff. And that was like a perfect situation because they were a team that obviously like made it through the first two rounds, and then they weren't necessarily like a perfect team by any stretch. So they had to like overcome certain disadvantages. So being able to kind of analyze how that was like transpiring, that's like definitely something that would kind of fit like that style that I like to do for sure.
Yeah, like I think it's definitely inspiring just from like especially for me and Will, like we've grown up and for both of us, like basketball's been our favorite sport ever since we were little kids. So I just think applying your knowledge of basketball to writing and like I'm sure, you can probably say the most for a lot of writers, but applying your knowledge to the sport to actually writing is honestly it's pretty cool, especially reading some of your articles and seeing how knowledgeable you are about the topic.
Yeah, I think that something that has sort of been lost in the sauce in this day and age has definitely been the tactics that go behind the game, and it's definitely been refreshing to, you know, see a guy who will come out here and diagnose, a drag dribble and 4-on-3 scenario versus just sticking to more narrative based writing because there is a lot of that in today's game. So that's definitely been something that I think a lot of Mavs fans have gravitated towards, to say the least. Next up, Grant. A lot has been made recently regarding the Mavericks' catastrophic final stretch of the season, of course, where they finished 7-25 over the last 32 games. But I mean, it was really a microcosm of where these last two games, especially. Of those 32 games against the Spurs and Bulls, where they sat multiple key rotation players. And obviously, the topic has become very divisive, not just within the DFW sort of media, but as well as the sort of NBA national media. And do you think the Mavs were justified in their regard to, do this whole tank job, quote unquote? And what was your reaction to the announcement of the NBA's formal investigation over the matter?
Yeah, I think there was justification in the decision to do it. I think a lot of the things that I was kind of focused on around it is the risks associated with doing it. I think honestly, like if you own a team or managing a team or whatever you want to say, if you have a judgment call to make, that's your judgment call. But I definitely think like pros and cons. There's like either side of the equation, like either choice. There's definitely like risks. So that's why like I felt like some people thought at times I was getting a little negative,
Yeah.
but it was like if I went through the history, like it's not the best way to analyze, obviously, like the last 10 picks to go 10th overall, but it's also
Right.
like it's good to have a refresher where it's like,
Mhm.
hey, like maybe there's not always like this great player
Yeah.
that's be available at 10 or picked at 10. So it's like if you tank out, you got to it's not to say that there's going to be a bad player that's taken, but it's
Mhm.
like you got to hit that pick, and it may be
Yeah.
a little harder than some people think, because people think like the top 10 pick, we're good, but no,
Yeah.
there's like work that goes involved to capitalize on that pick. But as far
Yeah.
as the investigation is concerned, I think just like the way the comments were made before the game, against the Bulls, to sit players and all that stuff, like I think you got to be a little more subtle with it, and then listing multiple players like Christian Wood and Josh Green, especially like like a low 20-year-old, like 23-year-old type of guy out for rest in a must-win game, like that's some alarm bell type stuff. I feel like
Yeah.
for the NBA, like that's a little more brazen than a lot of other situations where it would just be like, oh, sore right knee, just like 7 guys are going to be out with an injury today.
Right.
It was a little more bold than like I think a lot of recent situations around the NBA.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, to your point about the draft, I mean, it can definitely be fool's gold, really. I mean, throughout that whole lottery, we've seen countless guys, be apparent like surefire picks, just not end up panning out. I mean, a guy that like comes to mind, for instance, like, like Chris Duarte on the Pacers. He fell off a little bit this year after, a stronger rookie season. I mean, he was a older guy coming in, and seemed as if he was going to be a sort of seamless plug and play coming off the bench. So nothing's a guarantee there. And as much as Mavs fans are optimistic, and I know we are optimistic about the potential to get a top 10 pick at this point, we can't be blinded by the fact that the draft, while it is definitely something that has a lot of research going into it, it also is somewhat of a crapshoot at the end of the day. Other than that, you paid out of your own pocket to go a lot of these away games this year, and really during the latter half of the season, you've been covering games all this year, as well as the last, of course. And do you feel like there's been just kind of a stark difference in the vibes and morale of this team, comparable to the 2021 2022 team that you referenced? You were covering their playoff run and things of that nature, or do you think that the Mavs simply, it was good product, just bad results in terms of the group of guys that they sort of put together, but the personalities wise, they all kind of fit seamlessly together still?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a pretty clear difference between last year's group and this year's group from a locker room standpoint, I guess you could say, or chemistry standpoint, because they'd been together. A lot of those key names have been together for like quite a bit of years, or multiple years, if you will. And I think that goes a long way. I think when you're taking some of those types of guys off, that even like Jaden Hardy reference, like Spencer Dinwiddie, he was around at last year's trade deadline. He's not like the best example, but Dorian. He was around for quite a bit. He was instrumental teammate for Luka as well, and taking him off from even a locker room standpoint has a big impact. And then taking him off the defense, where he's like kind of the glue that's holding everything together. Even though they weren't fantastic, obviously, before the trade itself this year, but still, like there's a lot of on the court, off the court impacts that kind of go into kind of taking someone out of the equation in that regard. And I think I think Kyrie Irving was a helpful piece to have. I think some people like national media, not to focus too much on that stuff, but I think, there were some reports in recent years where it's like, oh, he didn't even talk to his teammates, stuff like that when he was with the Nets. And like that's not reality. I think he was a helpful presence. Jaden Hardy, again, as I referenced, I talked to him in Philadelphia before a game, and he highlighted Kyrie for being like someone that speaks up and is vocal and like tries to help solve problems whenever things are going south or just have been like trending negatively. And then at the exit interview, he highlighted him again. And I think that goes a long way when a young player can kind of identify that. That's usually like a good sign, in my opinion, when that stands out to them, and they're kind of bringing that up. So yeah, I think I think that was helpful to have, but I think overall they just didn't have enough continuity as a locker room and on the court. The clutch time situations, at times, or especially earlier, when Luka and Kyrie were sharing the floor, obviously like they had some losses there where, they definitely were on the same page. I think, that hurts, but then also when those guys are off the court, one's available, one's injured, and then vice versa, almost immediately after one came back, the other one was out.
Yeah.
Like that does not help at all when
No.
you're trying to stay alive down the stretch with a team that you probably already need to patch quite a bit of holes and make some upgrades on for sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean that, especially after the trade deadline, I mean, there's like 30 or so odd games, and there's just a lot of roster overhaul at that point. I mean, even if it's just two players, I mean, these are integral guys in the rotation, of course, both starters. And, I don't think that there's anything bad with Kyrie from a cultural perspective. I definitely would tend to agree with you that narrative has definitely kind of been severely overblown, in my opinion. There's obviously he's had his own sort of separate things that he's come under fire for since he's been in the NBA, but never have I felt like those have been, synchronized with, his teammates or anything, what to do with his leadership. And I mean, yeah, like you said, ever since he's been on the Mavs, from all signs point towards him being a good teammate and leader. So I definitely appreciate that insight. What do you got next, Jaren?
Yeah, so I guess just, given the Mavericks positioning in the bottom echelon of teams, to be exact, they have the 10th worst record and, projected the 10th overall pick. They've subsequently like given themselves much better odds to retain that top 10 pick, especially after the tank job or whatever you want to call it, or against Chicago and the San Antonio Spurs. But, that's of course due to the KP trade with New York and everything like that. I guess from an asset standpoint, with a team that's kind of, really just, I guess, like, what's the best way to put it? Like, just kind of dehydrated of assets. They're really lacking assets. What does a top 10 pick, I guess, do for a team like this? I know that you wrote an article pretty recently about the possibility of trading the 10th overall pick, assuming they get it after the May 16th lottery time. So I guess, just getting your view, like what does an asset like the top 10 pick do to a team like this that is pretty, deprived of especially draft lottery assets?
Yeah, I think he could probably get you in a trade, probably like a core piece that you can kind of integrate, and then kind of set a tone for starting to kind of patch things up. Like they've highlighted rim protection, like Mark Cuban's comments, in particular. He highlighted need for more length on defense as well. So I think like if you have a 10th overall pick, maybe that could get you someone like a Miles Turner, or like a shot blocker like that. I think that would go a long way to kind of raise the floor of the defense overall. That makes it a lot easier for everyone else on the perimeter to kind of stay home on assignments, and then they can better execute running off the line in those situations as well. So I think that would probably be like something, a possibility that could open up, whether it's exactly Miles Turner or not. That's just an example of the type of skill set that could probably be of use with a 10th pick trade, or whatever pick it is. I do think I think that the challenge that you do have that kind of pops up when you keep the pick, you can only move, like you can use pick swaps in the years that you don't necessarily that are kind of like tied up due to restrictions with the rules, but you can only move the 2027 pick. So I think you'd have limited chips at your disposal, because you have to also move a negative value contract most likely with the 10th pick to get a difference making talent. And then you also have to probably do the same with that future pick if you are going to just go aggressive with all those like chips, if you will. But then the complication with that as well is that it's like kind of the order of operations. The draft happening before free agency, if you don't have a complete idea of what Kyrie Irving is going to do, like if you patch all these things before you have that conversation with him and then he leaves, I guess you could still facilitate sign and trades. And then I'm getting into a lot of layers of that. But yeah, then it becomes a complicated matter where it's like, do we really put all our chips in before we talk to Kyrie? And then it's like, what opportunities do you miss out on? So I think it'll be I guess that's why I'm also not running a front office and I'm talking on podcasts instead. But yeah, it's like going to be a very interesting sort of order of operations, I feel like, regardless of the outcome with the picks.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I was like, do you see the Mavericks taking a more passive route and possibly, trading back? Like I know center and especially shot blocking is a much needed need among this team. So I know that there's names like Derek Lively. And I feel like, I forget the other kid's name, but I feel like he's from Duke or something. But yeah, like names like Derek Lively, like I know that they're projected in the 20s, but like, do you see them any world where the Mavericks trade back possibly, like I said, like going a more passive route?
I think honestly, I see more so just outright moving the pick with one of their contracts, mostly because it's like the amount of spending they're already going to be obligated to, especially if you like give Kyrie a max or near max. I feel like they're probably going to have to be more, I guess you could say, purposeful with the spending that they do have at some of those other spots. So I think using the pick to upgrade talent and better like allocate spending would probably be the most like probable route I would imagine. Especially, and it doesn't hurt when you have like reporters also saying it too. So like putting all that together, I feel like that makes makes the most sense and something that I could expect or foresee happening for sure.
No, I totally tend to agree with what you said. I just figured I'd bear the question. But Will, I guess, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah. Before I even like segue into the next question, just to kind of piggyback off of that, I mean, there's obviously, I think, a lot of premonitions in terms of Christian Wood's potential departure after how this season sort of played out, with both sides never, I guess, really coming in sync in terms of Mavericks management and coaching staff and Christian Wood, or however you want to view that. And I mean, if him and Kyrie were to leave, and even, I know a lot of people reference the Mavericks abundance of cap space they could potentially be looking at. I mean, it's not necessarily the most loaded free agent class. And, I know in this day and age, people tend to, gravitate, if you have money, you'll find a way to spend it. And, especially with the new CBA and all that sort of stuff. But I definitely do tend to agree with Grant from the perspective that, if you do select at 10 or even trading back to, even if that means getting, future draft capital, which could, increase your arsenal in future trades, those first round picks, especially as the salary cap and all these TV deals go through every year. I mean, they get marginally a little bit more expensive every year. I don't know exactly what the 10th pick is, but I mean, that's another $9-10 million, maybe a shade under, I guess, that you're allocating toward your cap sheet. So at that point, if you're, versus just swapping contracts for a team that's already in the luxury tax, especially with this, the new CBA, having that threshold with the, what is it, the non-taxpayer MLE, not being applicable anymore at a once you're above the, I believe, second apron or something like that. I mean, stuff like that. It definitely points towards that being a smarter direction. So I would definitely tend to agree with you from that standpoint. I mean, just talking about Christian Wood, the Mavericks traded a first round pick in last year's draft, pick number 26, that ended up being Wendell Moore for Christian Wood, along with, of course, Boban Marjanovic, Marquise Chris, Trey Burke, and I'm bluffing on the Sterling Brown. And in the 2022 NBA draft, and of course, they did this with the notion that Christian would be an unrestricted free agent this year. But as I alluded to, his time in Dallas has kind of been riddled with an inconsistent role, been a bit rocky in terms of, the whole starting, coming off the bench complex. What do you attribute to just the rocky season that Christian Wood has had? And do you think that he should have saw increased minutes?
Yeah, I think he should have saw increased minutes. I think even just from a managerial standpoint, when you make a big move like Kyrie Irving midseason trade, he's set to hit free agency, and then Christian Wood set to hit free agency. I feel like they didn't try all three of those players on the court nearly enough when you include Luka in that grouping. Injuries didn't help, but I think when they did have the opportunities, I felt like they were too reluctant. Especially when you just kind of break it down from, beyond like just like the asset standpoint. There were starts to games where teams would blitz Luka. He's not necessarily a guy that gets around double teams with speed. He gives the ball up in 4-on-3, and I feel like you end up having situations where Kyrie Irving's kind of watching and maybe attacking a closeout or flashing a little bit, but it's mostly neutralizing those two talents. So I felt like when some of the commentary was kind of like, oh, well, why would you have Christian Wood at the 5 to start when you have Kyrie and Luka on the court early on? Well, Kyrie's mostly playing an off-ball, like kind of picking his spots role, and Luka's getting doubled pretty often. So I feel like, you need more than two talented offensive players. I think you need to have, or could have used Christian Wood to kind of, break those 4-on-3 situations and keep the defense honest. And I feel like, honestly, it just shows that there was a talent deficit with the team where you're kind of facing out that many or that few of talented offensive players, and you're relying on offense, and you also have a bad defense as a team overall. Like that's a very flawed roster construction, in my opinion, where you're basically like spreading your offense thin, and you're also not getting stops. And it's like, no wonder they're on the outside looking into the playing
Yeah,
screen.
exactly.
When you kind of think of it from like when you kind of peel the layers back or whatever you want to call it, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you say to the fan? Because I think that the whole Christian Wood situation has been something that's been pretty divisive throughout Mavs Twitter this year. What would you say? Because, I mean, I kind of have like conflicting thoughts about this personally, but what would you say to the fan that would say, he's simply incapable of, being, a drop coverage, or even a weak side rim protector? Do you think that the Mavs were just never able to fully optimize his fit on defense? Do you think that they maybe should have deferred to some of those two big lineups with Maxey? Or do you think that the roster just simply wasn't really built to, optimize his defensive skill set? Because we saw at times in the regular season where he honestly looked comfortable, being able to guard guards. I can reflect back to that, game versus Golden State, where he got switched on to Stephen Curry on the wing, and he was able to hold his ground and get a block off a pretty quick 3 attempt. There's just been a sort of a we see these flashes of kind of defensive potential, but then we also see his lack of size, obviously against those bigger back to the basket centers. That tends to get punished at times, and we've seen him be kind of lackadaisical on rotations and things of that nature. Do you think that the Mavs were just never really able to find his fit defensively, or was he kind of just kind of doing this to himself by his own defensive deficiencies?
Thinking back, about Christian Wood before he made his Mavericks debut, if you think about what he showed with the Rockets, I think some of the takeaways I had looking at, the game film from his, I just looked through most of his possessions and minutes on the floor before, he basically played for the Mavericks. I think he was pretty underrated at switching with the Rockets. They did more of that than the Mavericks did. I think, he isn't necessarily going to be that guy who's going to protect the rim in a drop coverage situation. Mm-hmm. I think, even the Mavericks saw that in head-to-head matchups where, an example that kind of stood out to me when I watched on the film was Jalen Brunson. He's a very physical, driving threat. And he had a couple of instances last season where he just kind of played through Christian Wood. Like he did a veer step and just kind of protect the ball, used like contact, and then create an advantage at the rim for himself. I think that was very evident on the video. So I feel like the use of drop coverage, when he was the sole five, probably wasn't the best use of his his like athletic or physical profile, whatever you want to say. But I remember when he shared the floor with Maxey early in the season, there was some good results when they had him not be the anchor. They had him kind of focus on kind of being like making that closeout to the corner if the ball started popping around, or kind of being that weak side, rotate over and kind of protect the rim a little bit as that help defender. I think that was probably early on the best results, but I feel like they didn't do enough of the switching and really like kind of explore that and work through some things in that regard if there needs to be. I just felt like there was enough of a sample where like, just throughout, previous seasons where it's like you're kind of putting a 6'9", kind of thinner frame guy in a bad spot if you're funneling things to him by running shooters off the line and having him like deep drop and ball screens and expecting like a very good result. I think he gave an honest effort in the that department in terms of like focusing on his defense, because he worked with Sean Sweeney early after the trade throughout the summer. He kind of poured into it as well. Like just overall, I felt like like sometimes players will miss rotations, things of that nature. So sometimes it may not like necessarily have been like a consistent result. But that's also part of the issue I felt like with the approach is that if you looked at the last year's playoff run, the center position was an issue. Like with Dwight Powell, like teams didn't guard him in the half court when they switched, and he didn't really have much of an application outside of, like the deep, like kind of like going against drop coverage, catching lobs. He didn't really have much of a threat beyond that, and he's not a rim protector. He struggled on the glass. So I felt like the ceiling's limited in that regard. So I felt like they probably should have utilized Christian Wood more, worked through things. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. But also kind of taking that like weird approach that they did this year. They're not even in the play-in. So it's like, like even if it didn't work going the other route, I felt like it would have been better to exhaust all your options with soon-to-be free agents, a new talent, see what you can get like offensively, like kind of what we alluded to earlier with like the 4-on-3s. I just felt like it was a weird use of talents or like underutilization of talents or trying things, experimentation. And I just feel like obviously like I don't feel like it would make sense for him to come back with kind of the inconsistent role from just a career management standpoint. I feel like he'd have better opportunities elsewhere, because it's like it's hard for him to necessarily look at the situation, in my opinion, and be like, if I commit to this for however many years, I know what I'm gonna get, and I feel like this is going to work. Because like I felt like overall it was a very odd situation. I'm rambling, but I felt like it was an odd situation from start to finish.
No, yeah, and I mean the Mavericks defense, particularly in that playoff run, was predicated upon lots of communication, just very stringent on their rotations. We saw with that team, and to see just a very much of a stark difference this year. You lose Dorian at the trade deadline. You're not necessarily putting him in a position to succeed. With a lot of the Mavericks' lack of length on the wing, there's a lot of single dribble blow-bys. Where he's kind of just basically left up at the graveyard with somebody coming downhill at him, as you alluded to, 6'9", thinner frame guy. This is something that we've been hammering all season. But then, conversely, with the whole, playing him with another big that can at least sort of pseudo guard the rim in Maxey, if we want to label him as a rim protector, even though, you can kind of attach a few labels to him as a defender. It just was kind of malpractice. But then conversely, it's like, Maxey was out for all this time. It's like, what else? They didn't even have the personnel to do that. So it's a definitely a loaded situation, but something that I wanted to dip into for sure. What do you have next, Jaren?
Yeah, so I mean, just keeping on the topic of defense, like through injuries with Maxey and Dorian throughout majority of that first half of the season, like I guess just like you know what has been the root of the Mavericks defensive problems? Because last year especially during the playoff run, like the team really centered around a team-based defense in the sense of communication and also just rotational sound defense. Like I guess just I want to get your take. Like what has been the root problem of the season or throughout this whole entire season? And what would you attribute most to that Mavericks defensive issues? Whether it was maybe Reggie Bullock not coming on through, especially through the first half of the season. The trade of Dorian. Like what do you think was the real sort of issue, I guess, that this Mavericks team held on the defense side of the ball?
Yeah, I think honestly, a big part of it was kind of believing that there was a lot of sustainability with what worked last year. I think running shooters off the line and making extra effort after extra effort after extra effort with on a string communication. I felt like there's a lot of room for error with that happening and exhaustion. I think a lot of the wings, or not a lot of the wings, because they basically played two of them.
Yeah.
And Reggie, I feel like they play so many minutes. I don't know how taxing that ended up being the following season, but they're also not young guys in the sense of they're not like a Josh Green who's 23, 22. So I felt like even in January, Dorian had a groin injury that he came back from, and he wasn't necessarily the same physically. He was still working his way back. He had to come back and cover up some things defensively that I don't feel like it was in him to necessarily cover up. And I think obviously players just get hurt organically, whatever you can say. But who knows how much of the overall load of that type of style may have had on him and Reggie, and then just not having a rim protector to anchor things to kind of make it easier and take some pressure off of everyone involved makes that harder. But then also just not having a game-changing talent on defense in general. I feel like especially after moving Dorian, because he was probably the closest thing to that, because he did a lot of little things. I wouldn't say he was elite at a particular area. I think he was very good at quite a few things. But I think if you just look at what makes a great defense or some of the attributes or skill sets, whatever you want to say, you ideally want to have a rim protector. You want to have kind of a bigger frame, quick, agile, sort of four that can make those low man rotations, that can switch, like Draymond Green. That would be the perfect, four, just to kind of visualize that. And then you also would like to have, maybe a backcourt, Lou Dort stopper on the ball, Marcus Smart, something like that. They can kind of guard multiple positions and really pester somebody, whether they're quicker or bigger framed. But the Mavericks don't really have any of those things at all. And I feel like if you're going to talk about defense, it's important to kind of view it from a similar lens as offense. You need game-changing offensive talents to kind of set the tone. Going forward, it's like if you're going to build the foundation of a defense, what kind of is those foundational player types, who's going to fill those roles, and then also not having those, I feel like is a big part of that decline, because that just makes it easier for everyone. There's more consistency, just as there is with offense. You're not relying on unsustainable stuff. So I just felt like there was fundamentally flawed just kind of personnel in that standpoint, where it's there's a limited ceiling. It's taxing physically to execute the style they used last year. And then post trade with the post Kyrie trade period, they just pushed a lot of buttons. And I feel like between Maxey coming off of an injury and just not having those other talents, I feel like, you could push all the buttons you want, but if nothing's going to work for you with the button pushing, you're just basically pushing buttons to push buttons, and you're going to just not be in the play-in,
Yeah. So, I think that's a perfect follow-up to the question. I figured we might as well ask one Jason Kidd question, because especially as of recently, it kind of seems like his leadership or his, job, responsibility has been under question, especially the last few months of the season. He's been under a dim light by some this year, taking his team to, of course, the Western Conference Finals as a head coach, and then subsequently missing the playoffs. Do you think there's anything he could have done from a schematic perspective, or any change in rotations that he could have made to ensure this team right now? Or did you feel like this team was pretty much doomed from the start, just given the sort of, I guess, restrictions placed on this roster? Because to be fair, this roster, I don't think was built for a long playoff run.
Yeah, I definitely think before I get into the coaching part, the roster was definitely a challenge roster. I think when you start the season, you lose Jalen Brunson and you don't have a legitimate co-star. I think Luka getting overtaxed early on, and then not having like that top, sort of like top 10 defense, that definitely is a bad combination of factors. And then you're relying a lot on spot up shooting, with guys like Reggie Bullock struggling from the start. He later got hot from three, and finished pretty well, but that's an unsustainable approach. And then it kind of overtaxes Luka for the rest of the season. Then towards March and April, then you start to see where it's like people like me write articles like Luka needs to participate on defense and stuff like that, and showing examples of like against the Warriors where he's not getting out to shooters, they're picking on him in actions and stuff like that. So I feel like that alone was challenging, but also that's also why you start players and involve players like Christian Wood more. So then you don't have those burdens on Luka offensively, and you kind of run a more like, I guess you could say structured offense, or just, have him take a play off or two where you just let Christian Wood finish the play instead of kind of creating and generating so much of the offense for everybody else. That's kind of where I had an issue with kind of the approach from the lineup standpoint, is that I think people focus much on the shortcomings of individual players like, Christian Wood with the defense, because then like you kind of get lost on the fact that like if Luka's overtaxed by the end of the season anyways, none of this matters.
Yeah.
Like that, if the defense is awful and Luka, and Luka's fresher, at least he can maybe carry the team a little bit better. And you make that midseason move, and you're kind of having the firepower to maybe play that style. I just feel like with Kyrie also having injuries, like that foot injury himself, and then Luka also then being worn down, you didn't have that threat to necessarily just carry everything, regardless of the other circumstances. And that alone is like a tough thing when you're competing against other teams that have top players, and even teams that don't have top players, like the Charlotte Hornets, losing twice in a row. Like they're a hungry team. They want to spoil your season. They want to put you in the dirt, like Dennis Smith Jr. said. I just feel like when you can't really have your star's best foot forward at that point, on a consistent basis, your defense is bad, and you're relying a lot on one-dimensional players around all those things in between. That's kind of a tough set of circumstances to kind of overcome.
Yeah, I think, me and Will throughout this, pretty much the whole season of this podcast, like we've definitely reiterated the fact that this team is just too one-dimensional compared to other teams, or at least other contenders. So I definitely agree with your standpoint there. I'd be intrigued to see the sort of numbers, or at least on-court production between Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, and Christian Wood, if they, even produced any positive numbers. Like I know that me and Will, we don't really have access to those kind of numbers. So
you can find a lot of second spectrum stuff on NBA.com, but yeah, like some of the stuff, we can't really divulge into. But yeah, specifically, with that trio, I definitely thought that the Mavericks did themselves a disservice, as Grant alluded to earlier in the podcast, by not just playing them all three on the court together at the same time. Obviously we saw the pick and roll actions, the Spain pick and roll actions that the Mavericks ran with Luka Doncic and Christian Wood early on in the season. And they were honestly really successful just because of the, gravity. Luka, obviously warrants on traps and things of that nature. Having another gravitational factor in Kyrie that, you can, run off staggers and zoom action things of that nature. If you're able to sort of harness that, that's a lot of moving parts. Just up above the break, up above the top of the key that a defense has to account for. And I mean, I just think that there would have been a lot of opportunities for, Christian Wood to get a little bit more slippage. And he honestly could have just been spoon fed some points in the dunker spot. But they really just didn't defer to those lineups as much as, we kind of talked about there. But next up, and I'll kind of disregard this question because we kind of just answered this regarding the Mavericks, just how they played stylistically, before the season with Jason Kidd talking about, how they were going to divert away from, this heavy shot diet of 3-pointers. And then they subsequently ended up, still really adhering to that despite those statements earlier in the season. So I thought we definitely hit on that for sure. But, one of the big haymakers, Kyrie Irving is set to become an unrestricted free agent after the Mavericks trade for him, of course. Just schematically speaking, how did the ebb and flow of the offense change once Kyrie was instilled here in Dallas? Because, obviously there were some, moments where, like we alluded to, Luka and Kyrie, may have not, their on-court potential together may have not been fully harnessed, especially in some of those late game scenarios. But then, we did see a lot of guard screens for each other. We did see, particularly, towards the end of the season, the amount of off-ball actions that the Mavericks ran for Kyrie en route to getting him open. And, we've seen games like that Philadelphia game where, 80 points, 40 points from each player, where it's just a sort of insurmountable offensive load at the point of attack. So, just given that, how do you think Kyrie really changed the dynamic of the Mavericks offense? And if he does come back, and they have adequate talent surrounding him, do you really think that they could furbish something special there with him and Luka?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you kind of patch up some of the defensive concerns, like especially with rim protection, and then you don't throw out so many, like, obviously I don't know how. That's a very challenging thing. This is a very limited team in that regard for what they have to work with. But if you have a rim protector and you have better like size profiles at the 4 and the 3, you're not necessarily facing a disadvantage. Because, like, for example, I know I like kind of pick random things and then kind of go on a rant, but like Tim Hardaway Jr. guarding Jimmy Butler and then not having a rim protector, stuff like that is like, how are you going to put out a productive defense?
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like you can have as much offensive firepower as you want, but that stuff's not necessarily like, you're not going to go on a deep playoff run and be able like to give opponents your best shot for a 7-game series. It makes the chess match a lot harder when you don't really have extra moves to kind of get to in that regard. So, I just think they could do something special if they patch that stuff up. I think the big messaging stuff, that I think is important to kind of get to is, when Kyrie came in, he made it very clear that he's an add-on to what they're already doing as a team. They didn't have a training camp to kind of install things in the offense.
Right.
And then also another part of it is that he's an unselfish player who's going to set off-ball screens. He's going to set ball screens. Like I think like a lot of the national TV stuff kind of like drove me nuts a little bit, because I hear like as if it's, James Harden and Chris Paul adjusting to each other, when in reality Kyrie Irving's play with tons of high-level players, like a guy you might know, LeBron James, and then some people may have heard of that guy, and then like Kevin Durant, all kinds of players like that. Like, he's used to picking his spots and then becoming that Mr. Fourth Quarter, if you will, like as a closer, and then kind of like capitalizing on the moment there. So I feel like the focus on like, oh, can these two fit together? It's not about can these two fit together. It's can the Mavericks have the necessary pieces around those two guys to win at a higher level with the defense, and then having less one-dimensional players that take away from what makes those two guys special. Because, kind of going back to not to go back to it too much, but just the Christian Wood's standpoint of just not necessarily him as an individual talent, but just the general idea of having another offensive threat that's going to be a screener. You would have to be very cognizant about how you're switching with like Kyrie Irving, Luka, and a screener that's also a scoring threat against a switch. I feel like that kind of wasn't necessarily utilized as much. And if you want to just say, like, obviously, I don't think any of us know exactly definitives what's going to happen this offseason for anybody. But, just assuming that if Christian Wood were to go, and he's not necessarily the name we're going to use anymore, but having someone who can kind of be that problem, who's involved in like the high pick and rolls or even just like the screening actions in general, that teams have to be like, okay, well, we can't really afford to switch this with, those two players involved, or, whatever combination you want to say. I feel like, in general, like that could be something very special if you have like that type of like threat. Like if you're having Dwight Powell set screens, like not to single out someone or just, like a Reggie Bullock involved in the action, even on the ghost screen. Like the other team's not necessarily going to be like, okay, like we're really in a problem here after he disengages from this action. Like they're going to hone in on the one guy that they really want to hone in on.
Yeah.
You want to create more of those problems where you're like really like having to just give something up, and then you're just going to feast on it and then make them make decisions throughout a game. Having too many one-dimensional talents on both sides of the ball is like, it's definitely a thing that limits the potential. But long story short, if they just patch those things up, make some upgrades around them, I think they can definitely be special.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And, I like what you said earlier, where you talked about the Mavericks not necessarily having any of these sort of gaudy or, game-changing defensive players. You look at some of the hallmarks of, the upper echelon of teams in this league. And, we're looking at, multiple guys in a starting lineup, for instance, on the Celtics that, can defend multiple positions. Excellent point of attack defenders, with a guy like Time Lord when he's fully healthy to, be that weak side help defender, as well as really be able to switch on to anybody, 1 through 5. And, I'm not saying that the Mavericks have to have just the full defensive arsenal out here to be able to throw it at everybody. And, they don't have to have the most just optimized defensive lineup in the NBA, but I mean, at least just getting one of those guys to, just veer off some of the deficiencies defensively with how explosive this offense could be at times, especially if they're really able to, harness a third guy in the lineup with Luka and Kyrie. We could definitely be looking at something special here. And I mean, I kind of want to use that as a segue point, because you obviously covered the Pacers, and I know we kind of touched up on this a little bit. But just give me the more of a fun question, but just give me the sales pitch for Miles Turner, because I mean, this is a guy who I think was, definitely seen as, this sort of drop coverage rim protector who's a floor stretcher and was kind of riddled by injuries. But this past season, in tandem with Tyrese Halliburton in the pick and roll, this is a guy who's really came into his own in terms of his abilities in the short roll. He's worked on that push shot a little bit, and just became more of a general lob threat. And he just has a little more of a diversive offensive game that he's sort of developed here. How could a guy like that, just given your time when you covered him in Indiana, shift the playing field for the Mavericks if they had somebody like that to back the back line?
Yeah, I think he's definitely one of the more dynamic rim protectors in the league. I think honestly, I think his ability to switch is underrated by a lot.
I agree. Yeah.
Against the Boston Celtics, with Kyrie Irving in the series, he had quite a few possessions where, whether it was Kyrie, whether it was Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, where he was switching and not only holding his own, like with top of the key sort of ISO possessions, he was tracking them to the rim and either forcing misses or just completely pinning them off the glass. And Kyrie even said in that series that I wrote about, my eyes lit up when Miles Turner went to the bench because I knew I could get to the rim. So like that type of talent is, exactly would fit the description of what you would want, like someone who's going to make you second guess about attacking, or at least make you be really like, technical in your approach. Like you don't have that issue with the Mavericks. Like I've actually talked to a couple players, recent like not recent opponents, but when I did talk to them, they were recent opponents, like earlier in the season. They said that there was like no presence inside, like regardless of who's at the five, there's just no presence, and they don't get in the ball enough. With the on-ball defenders, all that kind of stuff. So basically, they're just a soft defense. Is essentially what they were described as at the point of attack and in the middle. And so you can't really, like, if the message is like that, or the thought for the other team is that's how they perceive you, and you're not going to be able to overcome it because you kind of are that type of defense.
Mhm.
Like that's a real problem. And I feel like Miles Turner at least lets you kind of like have more margin for error. He'll clean up mistakes because
Yeah.
he had some seasons where he was covering up for Darren Collison later in his career, Bojan Bogdanovic. And Victor Oladipo, he had an All NBA defense or All Defensive season, or had all defensive talent. A lot of his impact wasn't necessarily about staying in front of guys. It was like flying around with his wingspan and like making plays in that regard.
Mhm.
So he would get funnel his assignment to Miles Turner a lot as well. So like, he's used to having like underwhelming personnel, but in that same thought, a guy at the four that was playing alongside him was Thaddeus Young. So they had the 4 and the 5 that was very versatile with a dynamic rim protector, and that was enough to be like the third defensive rating that season. That they had those guys, and they had like pretty underwhelming perimeter defenders, especially off the bench. Like Corey Joseph was there, and he was good at getting into the ball. But like they didn't really have like any sort of like really high level perimeter defensive guys like what you would see now with like a Lou Dort or Marcus Smart.
Yeah.
Really just getting into the ball and like being a problem with size. So I think that's kind of the NBA has changed a little bit since then, but there's still similarities with the way the game's played now, where I think that kind of logical approach or foundation would be the way to start, is to have the 5 and the 4 where you can protect the rim, switch, and make low man rotations. That covers up a lot of problems. And then you would still, even like ideally in a perfect world, you would have more perimeter size at the 3, and then you would just live with whatever you get from Luka and Kyrie.
Right.
You're getting enough on the other end. And, if you do have enough talent offensively from that 3 through 5 after prioritizing that defensive approach or identity, then you could maybe not overtax Luka and Kyrie, and they can, as Jason Kidd likes to say, participate more on defense. Like I think Kyrie's a little underrated defensively. So I don't want, like, I think people just kind of like lump him in because he's a star, as like
Right. No, he's
terrible defender.
his
Like saying, oh, they
intangibles.
downgraded from Spencer Dinwiddie. Like, no, that didn't happen. So I had to at least say that. I had to throw that in there. But yeah, like I think all that stuff I feel like is something to kind of think about going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, just to speak to Kyrie's defense down the stretch of the year, admittedly, I hadn't watched a ton of, his defensive tape beforehand, but I definitely abided by the notion that he was a upgrade over Spencer at times. Spencer was able to use his length and, kind of freelance, and, he was decent in terms of, being able to pick passing lanes sometimes. But he did concede a lot of blow-bys. Kyrie, he really does get into the grill.
A lot of not boxing out and watching the ball go up.
Yes.
And I actually was just watching for an article. I was actually just watching film of the last game that Dorian played defensively. I saw Spencer Dinwiddie, like he should have had the size profile, the whole post ups. It's like Andrew Wiggins, and it's like he still gets scored on in that regard. He has the length, he has the size. And it's like that. Like I've kind of feel like the size thing is a fool's gold sort of benefit in a sense. Like I'm sure it benefits, like with, as you said, with the length in the passing lanes, jumping, for steals. But still, it's like there was functional elements that should have been there that just weren't there too often, for sure.
No, yeah, and I mean, I always kind of like to denote some of those guys that are like getting beat off of blow-bys like that, just like the inability to flip their hips. And it's funny because Spencer is such a, sort of just, I mean, he's all over the place, but in a certain kind of like good way on offense, with, his vast array of moves he kind of uses to draw fouls and, those ticky-tacky plays at the rim. He just, he's fairly savvy, especially with inside 10 feet. So I always find it funny when guys like that, I would honestly have to maybe, I don't know if it's just an effort thing or what, but they just have this like weird inability to kind of flip their hips. And the reactions, we kind of see it with Dwight Powell at times too, even though he's more of a sort of uber athletic five, he'll get beat, at the point of attack too, when he gets switched on to wings and things like that. So, that definitely is eye opening to say the least. But otherwise, we're going to give you a couple little knockoff questions here before we end this thing and wrap this up. We did not mean to keep you this long, but we have a tendency to overrun on our podcast because we just
I ramble a lot. So
I know it's okay. We typically get too analytical in a sense. In some of these games, we had to hold ourselves back in the Bulls and Spurs game and just go a little bit more big picture. I was like, Jaren, like, I don't know how much we need to talk about the on-court schematics of, McKinley Wright and AJ Lawson and stuff out here.
I went with the condescending approach for the Bulls game with GIFs and saying meaningful all caps basketball. That was kind of my thought on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I will say as much as though that AJ Lawson is definitely a guy that I've actually kind of pined for just to at least get a crack at things all year. So to see him be able to go out on a good note was definitely happy for the guy. He's a guy that I hope to return. Me and Jaren's have a little bit of a goal to kind of go to summer league this year. So I would really it'd be cool to get to see him if he's able to come back with the team. But, they obviously didn't bring him back after the first summer league go around, and at that position, nothing's guaranteed. But otherwise, what are your future plans in terms of, some of the stuff that you might end up covering with the team this year? Anything that you want to shout out in terms of things that, you're working on or you're, progressing towards, and you just opening up in your sort of array of coverage. And then after that, give me, because I know you posed this question on Twitter, so I kind of wanted to throw it back to you. If you had the opportunity to get to have a full film breakdown with one Mavericks player and then just one NBA player in general of your choice, they don't have to choose you. You get to choose whoever it is. Who would it be?
Yeah, I think I would probably pick Kyrie Irving, probably for both of those parts.
Yeah.
I think part of it is because I also know what I would get. Like, I felt like he would be very, engaging.
Yeah.
There's some guys where it's like Luka, for example. I feel like he's obviously a very high level basketball mind, but I don't know if you'd really want to watch.
Well, I mean, to Luka's credit, I've always just been fascinated at the prospect of when Luka gets older, how he may be able to sort of just sift through some of these things, because he's definitely not the most talkative guy in the world, but I do think there's something to the effect of the language barrier just being a little bit inhibiting in terms of how intricate he gets in some of those post-game interviews too. So I feel like one day when he's older, and he went on the JJ Redick podcast that one time, I think maybe one day we'll finally get that film breakdown from him one day.
Yeah, that would be that would definitely be fun to do. I think part of it is also this room full of reporters. They're annoying, so I don't know if I want to be in a room with one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's safe to say that me and Will are hopefully soon to be joining that room full of annoying reporters. But real quick, just again another fun question: who's your pick for MVP? And then now that the Mavericks are officially out of the 2023 NBA playoffs, what team I guess are you piggybacking on and deciding to root for? I guess probably the best way to answer that.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to be paying the most attention probably to the Knicks. mostly because of that's the only team I have like access to write about on the Fan Nation sites. So I'll probably be writing about them and focusing on them a lot. You know, I guess I get to cover Jalen Brunson in the playoffs
There you
one
go.
way or another. So I guess that we have that.
Have you had access to the Knicks all season, or this was like a recent development?
Well, actually, it's mostly like I have access to all the Texas teams and the Orlando Magic and the New York Knicks. Sometimes it's very random, like
That
with
is
that stuff.
interesting.
It's kind of like the
Yeah.
group of
Yeah.
it's very random. Like the
Yeah.
group of people that like we're kind of like a part of as a writing group. Some people like manage sites. Like I could write if I want to on those. I choose to focus like really heavily on the Mavericks. But since they're out, it's like, you know, like
Yeah.
I might as well do something. So it's like, you know,
Yeah.
be my focus for sure. But as far as the MVP, you know, race is kind of concerned, I think, you know, I think Jokic's candidacy probably tailed off recently. You know, I think people have always been kind of like they don't want to do the historic like 3 in a row, so they've been kind of
Right.
looking
No,
for
that's
that
the
excuse.
voter fatigue. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people are afraid to be like, oh, the first player since Larry Bird to win like 3 in a row or whatever it is, whatever the like scare line is on like Sports Center and all that stuff. Like, oh, he'd be the first. Like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
want to be associated with that because he hasn't won a title. I think he's given them that excuse now with like kind of the tail off towards the end of the season. I think he's deserving. I think there's like 3 people that are probably deserving regardless. But if I had to pick, you know, I think probably would go if I had a vote. I would probably go with Giannis is probably my pick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think all 3 of those guys, like you know, Joel being the third guy.
Yeah.
I think they're all deserving, but I would probably pick Giannis. You know, just my thought for sure.
Yeah, that I think that the voter fatigue sets in with him too because of his 2, you know, wins already. But you know, just from I don't know, I feel like he affects the game in a sort of multifaceted layer that I think that affects winning. I think just a little bit more than those guys. If I had to vote, I would go with him. But I definitely think as far as it's trending, it'll probably end up going to Embiid. But other than that, Grant, we have really enjoyed having you on. I know I tried to, you know, let you plug and play your stuff, but a little preemptively, I guess. So if you want to kind of plug anything that you got going on at Fan Nation or DallasBasketball.com or anything you got coming up this summer, definitely, you know, the floor is yours. And we really enjoyed having you on. It was a blessing and a great interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think some of the stuff that I'll be doing is like after I kind of recover a little bit from the end of the season, I'll probably do a lot of deep dives. Like why did the defense, you know, kind of like go from being so effective last year to being ineffective this year, and then kind of just sort through like what did we see from Kyrie and Luka on the court together. You know, kind of like probably a lot of like off-season ideas. You know, I always find like, you know, trade ideas to be interesting and like, you know, things like that when it kind of gets to that point. Maybe analyze draft prospects as well, like deep dives on them. I probably won't go as like full steam ahead on that one because, you know, after seeing reports of them potentially trading the pick, I feel like that would totally be a thing that I do where I analyze these guys and then the pick's not even made. And
That's going to happen to us too. So that's okay.
Oh yeah. That's I'm going to do it regardless, but it's like, it'll probably be for like just general basketball fans overall, as opposed to, you know, necessarily be my top priority, considering all things considered. But yeah, I think just overall, like a lot of deep dives. And then I'm going to try to make it out to Summer League, you know, as you guys said as well. Because Jaden Hardy mentioned that he'll probably be playing. So that'll make it a little more intriguing as well, even if they trade the pick. And then, you know, because of the Fan Nation things as well that I mentioned, like those sites, hopefully I'll be able to, you know, chip in with the Rockets and Spurs with, you know, how high of a draft pick those teams will probably have. You know, hopefully I get to cover Wembanyama a little bit out there in Vegas. The ping pong balls go my way. And then, yeah, just probably like Luka International play as well. I have access to the video for FIBA, so I'm gonna really you know, break down for people who can't watch, like really do like deep dives and all that stuff
Mhm.
game by game. So yeah, that's probably like a majority of what I'll do is just that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to that because I know Jaren and I specifically, we were hard pressed to be able to watch those FIBA games over the summer last year. They were just, especially as they were overseas, they were just really, kind of obstructive in terms of the timing and everything like that. So to, get that in that sort of format, I think is going to be really cool. But other than that, like I said, really appreciate having you on.
Here, I got one more major question. Grant, will you be attending Bullock Island during the summer off season?
Bullock Island. I don't know if my budget would allow me to head down to Bullock Island, but I feel like if I did have a budget to go to Bullock Island, I'd probably go to Luka's international games instead.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
that's probably what I would do instead.
Yeah.
I respect that. I
respect that. Yeah, well, I think Bullock Island, maybe Reggie can get into some, sort of deep meditation and sort of revitalize his legs a little bit, and he'll come back as one of the best screen navigators and 3-point shooters next season. So I think
the first 2 months he'll be
after the first 2 months. Yeah, if we could just send him to Bullock Island for the first 2 months. And then bring him back. That would honestly be
hopefully
awesome.
I don't have to save my tweet templates for everyone involved where I show the lowest 3-point percentage among like a certain volume.
Oh, gee.
I don't like being negative. So hopefully I don't have to break those out to start next season.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the sort of the trend with Reggie at this point. But otherwise, of course, you guys can follow Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth and see all his stuff at dallasbasketball.com, of course, and Fan Nation. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs if you guys haven't. Also, make sure to follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on almost every listening platform. Shout out to the Step Back Mavs podcast. I know that you and Dalton, of course, are over there at dallasbasketball.com. They got some good stuff too. So subscribe to all the Mavs podcasts. Everybody is we've definitely been covering a sort of a decrepit team over the last few weeks, and at this point it's definitely exuberating to just be able to sort of de-wind and talk shop about the off season and stuff like that, even though we do wish we would be in the playoffs right now, if we're all being honest, but it is what it is. So
I should be doing 2,000 word breakdowns on playoff matchups. I almost feel like I'm missing out.
Yeah.
I saw someone post that I follow was like, "Oh, I'm 2,000 words into the Kings defense," and he covers the words. I was like, "Damn, I wish that was me."
Yeah.
I have to hope for summer league now. That's how much I love the day to day of or I got used to it in the last little while. I was like, I'm hoping for summer league. Like, what is wrong with me?
And I think I can speak for Jaren and myself that I can only wish to get to that sort of level of grind and drive, man. Cause you definitely been on one this season. Just like Reggie, really since the turn of the new year. So, but anyways, like I said, make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you guys already haven't. And if you guys are listening on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And for those of you commenting, comment. Would you like to see Grant back again? Did he pass the litmus test of the mainstream Mavs test? Yeah, maybe
throw me in off-season trades too.
Yeah, yeah. You never know. So
I don't have much value, but it's okay.
Well, do you have more value than Davis Bertans at the moment is the real pressing question. So
Twitter GM, not Twitter coaches poll, but Twitter GM's poll. I'll post that.
Okay. All right. All right. But other than that, this is Will Miller, Jaren Boslow, and Grant Afseth, Mainstream Mavs Podcast. We will see you guys in the next one. Signing out.